As of May 2026, Alistar Mid has a 60% win rate in professional League of Legends. Granted, most of those wins are from Shushei in Season 1, but that's beside the point. This pick has been slept on since the game's inception, and today I intend to prove if Alistar Mid is genuinely playable or just reportable. To start, we need to figure out how to play this character mid. If we take a look at Alistar's kit, he actually has some crazy AP scalings on pretty much every basic ability. So I dove into some normal games trying out this build. This was fun for a few games. I'd occasionally one-shot people who were clearly just paying attention to Netflix on their second monitor. However, I pretty quickly realised this wasn't going to find me much success in ranked. I needed something that allowed me to both survive lane whilst providing mana and AP for trades. Rod of Ages seemed like the pretty clear option, and I took that into my first ranked game. Except I didn't, because during my Aatrox games, I had the bright idea of playing Alistar if Aatrox got banned. So my first ranked Alistar game was honestly completely wasted. I'm not sure if it would have really mattered though, since my next 4 games were just as bad. These 2 games alone would result in me permanently banning Xerath for the rest of the challenge. He was the first member of the unholy trinity of matchups for Alistar. I'll be going over these 2 later. Anyway, back to the ranked games. My first win was surprisingly against Cassiopeia. After some fortunate trades early, she seems to have just tilted. She wasn't even sure which first item she wanted to buy. This would also be the first game that I would experience just how strong Alistar can be. He may not be the strongest in the 1v1, however he really excels in teamfights and skirmishes. The constant threat of being able to point and click chain CC to set up a gank for your jungler makes it really difficult to lane against this champion. In fact, you don't even necessarily need your jungler or even a damage dealer. Someone else with CC can be more than enough to give Alistar the extra time he needs for his cooldowns. Take this clip for example. Q flash onto the Cassio and then headbutt her into my jungler. We don't manage to get the pick, however she uses flash so it's not too bad. A few minutes later, my support Maokai is able to lane gank mid because Cassio still doesn't have flash. She is full HP at the start of this fight. The burst damage mixed with mine and Maokai's CC just makes it completely unplayable for Cassio. Despite how good Alistar can be at engaging, most of my fights would actually have much more success if I focused primarily on peeling my carries. Here, my main focus is keeping the Nautilus and Quinn off of my Tristana. In hindsight, I probably should have thought about the Fiddlesticks ulting. If I was a little bit closer to Tristana, she might not have been forced to flash away, however, the fight still played out relatively well. After a couple solo kills on the Cassio and a few decently played teamfights, not only had I managed to win my first game, but I was able to ride that momentum into securing a consecutive win as well, putting me at 2-5 overall. I had finally sparked the confidence I needed to turn my win rate around, and I was really looking forward to the next few games. That is, until I came across the second unplayable matchup for Alistar. I cannot emphasize enough how miserable this matchup is. I would genuinely rather play 100 games of Malphite into Sylas than to play Alistar mid against Vladimir ever again. There is practically no way Alistar is ever able to beat a moderately competent Vladimir. He can out-sustain you in lane, he can short trade against you in lane, he can take extended fights, he can always have lane prio, and of course, he even outscales you. There is only one thing you can do to a Vladimir, and that is to try to force him to use his pull before begging your jungler to gank. I was fortunate enough to play against one Vladimir the entire 50 ranked games I played. No one really played Vlad when I was doing my Alistar games. However, the same can't be said for the current patch. If I was going to start my Alistar games today, there is no doubt in my mind that Vladimir would be my permaban. Despite going through the most excruciating lane imaginable, I actually had some pretty decent takeaways from this game and the following few games. First, I wasn't really having mana issues during the laning phase, and I wasn't happy with how long Rod of Ages takes to come online. In fact, Rod of Ages actually has a negative gold efficiency until around 3 or 4 stacks. Due to this, I stopped buying Rod of Ages altogether, and instead would buy Rocket Belt as my first item. Rocket Belt is such a good item for Alistar mid for multiple reasons. It's cheap, it provides AP, health, and 20 ability haste. Plus, the active gives him much more playmaking potential. In fact, the Rocket Belt active actually procs upgraded Lucidities. This means after dashing towards an enemy, you get an additional burst of move speed for 5 seconds. For the laning phase, this item was perfect. However, I would eventually need some form of mana to allow me to shove lanes in the mid game without going Oom. This would lead me to my second core Alistar mid item, Blackfire Torch. This provides another 20 ability haste with a decent passive that helps with both teamfights and with shoving waves. From this point on, Rocket Belt into Blackfire Torch were my core items, and I had immediate success with them, going on a 5-game win streak. Around this time, I was actually approaching the halfway mark for the challenge. This win against Victor would conclude my 25th game, and unfortunately, only my 11th win. I only had a 44% win rate so far. At this point, it was very clear to me that I wasn't going to finish the 50 games with a positive win rate. That is at least, unless I get some help. So I booked myself a coaching session, which I would happily show you, however, I forgot to record. So instead, I'll summarise the main 3 takeaways. First, my positioning sucked. Due to primarily playing mages and assassins, I was always avoiding standing near my ADC or fed carries. This is completely the wrong mindset with Alistar though. He wants to have his feet planted as close to his carries as possible to prevent anyone diving on them. My second mistake was kind of similar. I was focusing too much on engaging and diving the enemy as opposed to peeling my team. This clip is a really good example. Instead of staying with my Mel and keeping her alive, I tunnel vision on the Lilia, resulting in both Mel and me dying. The last mistake was also somewhat connected. Alistar isn't an assassin. Just because you give him Electrocute and a couple AP items, it doesn't change his kit. Rocket Belt into Blackfire was fine, however, further investment into damage items is generally just wasted gold. And honestly, when rewatching my games, I could see exactly what he meant. I was dying way too quickly, so I started investing in some tankier items, but still with ability haste. This allowed me to use multiple rotations of my spells before dying. It also allowed my teammates to stay alive longer due to my peel, and it made Alistar mid significantly easier to win games with. In fact, I basically completely dropped Electrocute in replacement for Phase Rush, which isn't in the game anymore. Over the next 10 games, I became obsessed with keeping my carries alive. And not only did it lead to my teammates ending with scorelines like this, but it would also lead to me winning 7 of those 10 games. My confidence in my ability to play Alistar was by far the highest it had ever been. If I played well in lane and the enemy team was relatively short range, I could have games like this. Or, if I was struggling, I always had the reassurance that I could transition into fully enabling the rest of my team. The game on screen at the moment was game number 35. With a decisive win in this game, I would have a record of 17 wins and 18 losses. A 49% overall win rate. It still wasn't ideal, but it was a massive improvement from the score I had earlier. Another 10 games would land me on a scoreline of 22 wins, 22 losses. For the first time in this challenge, I had reached 50% win rate. This was doable. All I had to do was win 3 more games, and much like in my Aatrox video, I was eager to finish this in one day. The first game was rough. My top laner was struggling. I had managed to pick up a few kills through skirmishing early, however, after losing a dragon fight at 23 minutes, my team were completely mental blocked. I really didn't want to surrender. At this point in the challenge, every single game was so important, but my team had had enough. 4 yes votes go through, 5 games left. I load into the next game, and that's when I come across Melania Madada. Mel has undoubtedly been the most hated champion in the game since her release. She's not even good. She literally has the second worst win rate in the game at the moment. Despite that, she is banned in over a quarter of games. At the best of times, this champion can be infuriating to play against. And if for some reason you're playing Alistar mid, she's even worse. Much like Xerath, she completely outranges you, and similar to Vladimir, if you do manage to engage on her, she can just W the majority of your damage. Fortunately, her W currently only gives the shield. If it still gave her invulnerability, she might have actually been more frustrating than Vladimir. This wasn't the first time I had laned against a Mel though. I'd already lost quite a few games to her. However, I was prepared. If I could stay focused and try to play through my Lilia and Smolder, there's a chance that I could— nope, she gapped me and solo carried the game. Okay, next game. This time, I'm laning into a Malzahar. This lane is relatively fine. His Voidlings give you passive stacks, so you can actually stay pretty healthy in lane. Obviously, if the enemy Viego goes 17 and 3 though, that doesn't really matter. I am left with 3 more games to play, and I need every single one of them to be a win. For the first game, I get matched into a Syndra. Honestly, that's not too bad. I just need to try and set up ganks for my jungler, and if I can manage to buy tier 2 boots early, maybe I can bait out some of her spells to allow me to shove and roam. I know I'm going to go down CS, but that's okay. If I'm able to help the rest of the team get ahead, then it's definitely worth it. 3 minutes into the game, she decides to use QE on me under tower. With my Rengar en route, she gets headbutt pulverized into giving me my first kill of the game, and securing me lucidity boots. This actually gives me a lot of survivability in lane, due to more reliably dodging Syndra's abilities. However, more importantly, it allows me to get to plays first, and help the rest of the team snowball. And we really snowballed this game. Me and Rengar got 2 takedowns on the enemy top and jungle, which we then used to get grubs, and another kill on the Rammus. Syndra seemed to get pretty frustrated with the game crumbling around her, and in her attempt to take back control, she only ends up giving more gold to our jungler. We would ride this momentum to securing every single dragon in this game, including the Cloud Soul, and after a couple shaky teamfights, we were finally able to close out the game. The first game was secured, I just needed 2 more. The Lissandra lane can be quite difficult. She's relatively low range, however, she can interrupt your headbutt with her W. I'm not sure if this Lissandra knew that though, since she didn't actually do it a single time this game. Despite that, I still struggled. We traded 1-for-1 early, but after that I died to a gank, a solo kill, and then another solo kill. I was pretty far behind this game. However, fortunately for me, Lissandra and Diana were both AP. This made buying early magic resist very efficient, so I skipped Rocket Bolt and Blackfire altogether and just went straight into tank items. It even allowed me to get a bit of revenge on the Lissandra, solo killing her just before the Drake spawned. 5 minutes later, I was able to get 800 shutdown gold from the Diana, and also use that to get the second dragon. I can tell I was clearly pretty nervous during these games. I'm tunnel visioning on kills instead of focusing on peeling. I'm messing up my WQ combo. I look really shaky, and even though we were winning fights, if I didn't change something soon, we were more than capable of throwing this game. This was even more clear to me for the fight for the next Drake. I decide to go in, 1v3, and am forced to flash away from the Rakan knockup. We still managed to secure the objective due to how strong Arcane was, however, I really needed to calm down. Fortunately for me though, so did the enemy Diana. She face checks the Tribush as the soul is spawning, and is swiftly dealt with by the Aurora and Twitch. The ensuing 5v3 was pretty easy considering the Umbessa had committed to pushing the top wave. We had the Ocean Soul. I had 3 strong carries that I could play through. Now I just needed to not make any stupid decisions that could result in throwing the game. While Sambessa was in base, I saw an opportunity to dive onto the Smolder. After realizing I was way too far from my team, I used Randuin's Omen in an attempt to delay Rakan's Grand Entrance. And then, in this position, I needed to make a choice. Either I follow the Kayn and look for a 3-man knockup, or I keep the Lissandra off my backline. "24 wins, 25 losses. I still had one final game to play though, and once again, this needed to be a win. This is best case scenario for me. Not necessarily for Alistar as a champion, but for me personally. Ahri is my best champion by a country mile, and I know exactly how to play against her. In fact, as Alistar mid, I have played against 5 Ahris so far, and I have won every single game. The early lane is pretty rough, but that's to be expected. The enemy support gets first blood, however, my Aurelia and Lee Sin have some success in an early 2v2 topside, so the game is looking relatively promising. I take a reset, come back to lane, and then after a few trades, I manage to get a solo kill on the Ahri. Briar does clean up, however, she's a low range melee champ, so it's fine if she has a few kills. At 6 minutes, my top laner gets solo killed, and then our bot lane get caught in the river. Fortunately, the Briar somehow executes, and the Smolder is forced to reset, so we take the opportunity to once again secure the first dragon of the game. Top lane trade 1 for 1 again. That should be fine. At Grubs, I mess up an engage on Ahri. I'm not sure if it really would have worked since Rakan was top, and Aurelia had just been solo killed. She respawns, goes straight back to top, and less than a minute later, she is grayscaled for the 4th time in less than 10 minutes. And then a 5th time. And now the 6th. That would be the last time Aurelia died that game. She rage quit. I had one more game to play. I needed one more win. And now my top laner is AFK. This is still winnable though. I've won 4v5 games before. I purchased my Hextech Rocket Bolt, and I head to top lane to try and hold Cassante from taking our top tower. After a rough trade, I attempt to recall, but am rudely interrupted by the enemy jungler. Before I can even respawn, this pops up on my screen. I have a lot of regrets with Alistar. Maybe if I hadn't queued up for my 6th consecutive game that day. Maybe if I'd started using Phase Rush earlier. Maybe if I decided to get coaching before I was already halfway through my 50 games. Maybe if it didn't take me 11 games to realise a Rod of Ages wasn't working. Maybe if I hadn't wasted my very first Alistar game playing some dumb full AP build that I hadn't even tried in normal games yet. But there's nothing I can do now. That was my final game. Since I didn't finish with a positive win rate, Alistar can't be placed into one of the top 2 categories. Even if I had won that last game though, I was probably still going to put him in OTP required. This doesn't mean that I think he's a good champion for someone to one trick. What it means is that if you're going to make him work, you need to play tons of this champion. You need to understand how to play into artillery mages. You need to understand how to min-max his laning phase. You need to understand when to go electrocute, when to go phase rush, when to go aftershock, which items to buy, how to play with your team. You need to like fully grasp every aspect of Alistar to make this character work consistently. consistently in mid lane. And also, unless you really enjoy playing specifically Alistar, there's not any good reason to play him. Like, Galio already exists. He has much better wave clear. He has a significantly easier laning phase, and his ult is perfect for mid lane. So I couldn't really advise anyone play Alistar unless for some reason you are just a fanatic when it comes to wanting to play a Minotaur. Okay, next champion. I already checked Ambessa in the rule set video, but just to show again, she already has 5 master mains in that play her in mid lane. So next champ of the Moomy. See you in 50 games.